It's fascinating that we go through these government shutdowns. And one of the things that really is never really put in perspective is at what cost. So, R.J. Blake served in our military combat veteran. It's fascinating because when the government does shut down, and this is a point I want to make, whether it's TSA workers, whether it's FBI agents, Homeland Security, essential and non-essential employees, they're not paid. Not paid. They're not paid until the crisis is resolved. But the 535 members of Congress who have the power to prevent it are paid. So why do I raise this point? Most people live check to check. It's just a fact. And if you don't get your check, it can place you in further and deepening financial crisis. You would think that members of Congress, if they're elected by the people, they should have much in common with the people. So if they decide to shut this government down, they too should not be paid. Now, I know people make a lot of it that we have these multimillionaires. Not everybody in Congress is a millionaire. Yeah. You can get there by insider trading and the lobbying and the deals you cut, but that takes time. And now that it's under further scrutiny, it's going to be even more difficult. But isn't there something wrong with that you would have less of an incentive to shut down the government if you were not getting paid?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that this morning. I think it should change, and I think we might see more movement if that was the case, if they were also facing the same lack of a paycheck, I would hope.
How does it, let's say when the government shut down, how does it really impact the military? I mean, I said to someone recently, there is no way that you are going to do the same job versus paid and not getting paid. You lose something. The incentive, the motivation, especially when the lawmakers are getting paid. I mean, you can talk about, you feel a sense of duty, a sense of commitment to your country, but people are human.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lack of morale in these times, and productivity certainly goes down. But I think there's good men and women out there that care about their jobs and they work hard, and we've seen it before. And the important and critical things still got done. And I'm just hoping for that kind of the glass half full sort of approach.
Louis?
Yeah, it tests the readiness of the federal employee, of the active duty military personnel, of TSA, DEA, border security, in a way that's unnecessary. Like everyone's human. They're all getting texts from their family members. They're all worrying about how they're going to pay rent. How are they going to get supermarket this weekend? So it's testing the system and the resilience of the federal employee and the willingness to work without pay in a way that threatens security. Right? We saw this month an accident of two Delta flights colliding in a runway, and I'm not saying that necessarily has to do with the air traffic controllers, but that's part of the system, and they're worried they're not getting paid.
You're a military guy, R.J. Blake. Help me understand, and us understand, what the Secretary of Defense is trying to accomplish with the generals.
I think a lot of speculation there, but I would say we need to toughen up. There's a lot of threats abroad, a lot that I think the public has not awake to, and we need to be as lethal as possible.
He's a military guy. He's only going to say so much on this, so I'm going to have to turn to you.
No, of course.
I'm sure something about the image bothered you.
I think that also the President and Secretary of War, they wanted to test that chain of command, right? At the end of the day, these generals and admirals have to obey their civilian.
Are you saying they're not obedient?
No, I'm not saying. I'm thinking the administration is probably worried that they have orders in the future that they want to implement abroad.
DEI DEI orders.
Yes, and well, also like military orders in general, actions abroad. I'm thinking about imminent action in Venezuela or the deployment of military personnel within the country that might be getting some pushback from within, or at least conversations in military hallways that, according to military culture, shouldn't be happening, shouldn't be questioning the chain of command. So I think that the message was also sort of like, I'm going to look at you in the face and see how you react to what I'm saying, and whether you're going to fall in line with the president and the speech that he gave.
You know what's interesting about this is that what we don't realize is that this often happens between the military, the president, and the Secretary of Defense. The media would want you to believe, this is where I really fault the media with a false narrative. This is not unusual.
Correct.
Talk about it. This happens.
No,
it's
and
customary.
even the meeting was blown out of proportion at the media and mainstream media, making unprecedented and highlighting the security issues of bringing so many generals and admirals. It's like, hey, this is how things work. And yes, the Secretary of War is allowed to and should be addressing his generals and admirals on a routine basis. So I think that the highlight was put on this event in a way that it was unnecessary. It should have been a normal meeting. It shouldn't have been blown up out of proportion in every media outlet.
So, what's on your mind today? What's burning with you?
Well, the shutdown and how long this is going to last. I've been a small business owner for 12 years. We're looking to size out of that. We've had a lot of success, but just thinking of what does the future look like, right? I'm a glass half full individual as a combat veteran. I have this rags to riches story. It's got me where I am today. I think America has that same resilience. But what does the future look like? The modernization efforts that we need to turn on, national security, economic security is national security. I think these are the things that I'm thinking about. How long is this shutdown going to last?
Tell us the impact really on small business owners that they don't necessarily report.
Yeah.
That can make or break your business.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we are very fortunate in that we're in the intelligence community as well as the defense, and most of our work is deemed mission essential or critical. But there is a portion there where you're talking about maybe $1 million that you need to have as a cushion that you'll never get back. A business our size, let's say 100 plus people, that's a good chunk of change. So I think a lot of the small businesses that maybe are not as mature, or certainly the fly-by-night companies are maybe going to go out of business. That's okay there, but there's certainly going to be impact. And I think small businesses have a large impact, an immediate impact on the local economy, the GDP, job growth, and things like this that we could see impact.
So Louis, how do you interpret the administration's messaging around permanent downsizing? I mean, is this just political rhetoric or a major shift in federal workforce policy?
Well, I think President Trump called it an opportunity, and I think that's how the administration sees it, because it has the opportunity of putting pressures on Democrat and showing that, if they don't reopen or they fail to reach an agreement with Republicans short term or long term and cause another shutdown, for example, in the near future, then the Trump administration will have the opportunity to do what they've wanted to do since they got elected, which is trim down the federal workforce. So who will be to blame? Not really President Trump, when the one who gave him the opening was Democrats. And I think it also puts pressure on Congress, because the power of the purse belongs to Congress. So it's interesting how, at least on the Democratic side, they're pointing fingers at the president when he shouldn't have anything to do with this entire process. So if anything, I think that lawmakers should stop kicking the can every time there's a government funding battle and just extend with a continuing resolution and reform the process. I don't think they've actually gone through the whole full 12 appropriation bills since the 1990s. So maybe think of, instead of yearly budgets, maybe biannual budgets or something that allows Congress to function and not be paralyzed every 6 months, every 3 months with another CR, with another funding battle.
RJ, let's talk about the national security risk, if there are any, when mass firings or prolonged shutdowns affect these federal agencies, and what are the broader national and global signals being sent when the U.S. government sinks to a point where it has to shut down?
Yeah, I mean, economic security is national security. So actually, what I think about is the bloat, and I think a lot of people don't realize. They think, oh, the biggest spend is on defense and national security. Actually, it's not. It's health and human services, Medicare, Medicaid, some of these other areas. There's a lot of improper payments. In 2024 alone, there was $162 billion spent improperly. Now, not all that's fraud, but there's certainly been kind of runaway spending, a deficit with our interest expense alone, I think is $1 trillion this year. That is not sustainable. I don't care what side of the aisle you are on politically, that's just not sustainable. So I think we're seeing in this current administration, there's an agenda, they've been clear about it, and I think they're moving out on that agenda, and opportunity and adversity is kind of the name that I see right now with this unprecedented potential rift during a shutdown.
Obviously, not the party care about the national deficit.
Yeah, no, and like you just mentioned that economic security is national security. Another thing that people are not paying attention about continuing resolutions, it's not only about keeping the government open, is the fact that if you don't go through the appropriate process, you're not actually going into the detail of how the money should be spent and how you should change that year after year. So if you're thinking about Department of Defense, that means that you're not going into each department and seeing what's not being done right or wrong and reallocating the money. You're just continuing spending from previous levels. And right now we're seeing battlefronts in Europe and the Middle East that show, and of course, the China ramping up its military spending in the Indo-Pacific, that shows that the U.S. military might not be ready for future warfare. We're not ready with counter-drone systems. We're not ready with munition supplies if it comes to like a missile war in the Indo-Pacific. So a continuing resolution is not only about keeping government open, but it's also showing that Congress is not doing its main job, which is funding government. And whenever people say that Trump is, exceeding his powers or pushing the boundaries of presidential authority, we also have to think about the fact that that's because Congress isn't doing its job. And the president is trying to see how he pushes the boundaries to get things done.
Well, it's Gingrich that changed much of this when he was Speaker of the House. And Congress has not really embraced their duties since the Gingrich era. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. Yeah, it's true. So we welcome our CIA operative who's joining us from some disclosed destination, and Charles Johnson as a writer joining us also. So let me start with you, Mr. Operative. Let's go overseas. Obviously, there's a proposal for peace in Gaza that everyone is on board with except Iran, every Middle East country, the United States, Europe, Israel. Netanyahu is willing to cease fire. Hamas is thinking about it. Where are we in terms of the negotiation? If you've seen this song of ice and dance before, how do you think it will play out? And welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks, Armstrong. The key factor I always refer to with these kinds of things is the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, and Iran and Hamas have a horrendous track record of keeping their word. It's not wrong to lie to us, to lie about anything they want with the West. They see us as infidels and inferior, and it's not wrong to lie to us. There's no motivation at all to be truthful in their negotiations. They don't have to be.
Charles, this is a question for you. What has happened to people caring about the truth anymore?
Well, we're in trouble. I mean, we're in trouble when we have various leaders around the world that get by pushing things as far as they can. And we have a situation in Israel where we have a leader who's in effect facing real criminal charges. That's Benjamin Netanyahu.
What do you mean that?
Well, he's facing
Yes, he is.
serious corruption issues, and his coalition doesn't want him to end this conflict. They would prefer it go on and on and on. And they say that they want a greater Israel project, and I think we should take them at their word. So I think there's a whole lot of groups that have no interest in this peace deal really happening, and if they did, the peace deal would have already happened.
You know, I find it interesting you mentioned the people in Israel that take issue with Mr. Netanyahu and the corruption. Are you implying to us that Mr. Netanyahu is the problem?
Yes, I mean, it's pretty obvious that he's the issue, and we know this from his long.
And what is the issue?
Oh, the issue is that his coalition depends on extreme settlers in the West Bank who want a greater Israel project. They talk about it, they write about it, they come, some of them can't come to the United States because they're so extreme, but they're very serious about their desire to take over Gaza, to take over the West Bank, which they call Judea and Samaria. And, we have a history of Netanyahu. He's now been to the United States 4 times in 8 months. And we have a history of him threatening other leaders around the world. And our closest allies are not fans of his. He's facing criminal charges in the International Court. I mean, this is not necessarily the best of friends.
So do you believe that there's genocide in Gaza perpetrated by Netanyahu?
Well, that's certainly what a lot of scholars are saying, including a lot of Israeli ones. Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say when you have a campaign of killing women and children that are unarmed, there's been many reports of aerial bombardments targeting civilian centers, snipers shooting people coming from church or mosque. Yeah, it's pretty disgusting stuff.
Well, what about Hamas?
Hamas is obviously one of the worst terrorist organizations in the world, but you have to ask yourself, why did Benjamin Netanyahu for years allow Qatar and others to give them money? And this has been a huge issue in Israel. It's a huge issue in the region. And the reason is very simple. He doesn't want a moderate force to negotiate with. He would prefer to deal with the terrorists. And, Israel's brand for many, many years, and, you know this just as well as I do, is that they're very good on security. And yet October 7th, we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of that. And we see that they weren't very good at security. And I think this is changing how a lot of people are seeing Israel, and they're changing how...
But it doesn't seem to see, it's not how the United States has seen Israel.
No, historically, no. The United States has been very, very close with Israel. But our closest allies, France, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, they're recognizing a Palestinian state. I mean, they're moving in a different direction. The world is kind of moving away.
So you think the United States should have a different diplomatic relationship with Israel, or sever ties altogether? What are you saying?
I think the questions are kind of, they're too closely tied in with the Netanyahu question. In Israel, there's lots of people that oppose what Benjamin Netanyahu's been doing. Yair Lapid, former prime minister, Yossi Cohen the other day was opposing him. He's a former Mossad director. So I think we have to kind of get rid of the Netanyahus of the world, and that's going to be...
Get rid of them?
Yeah, we're going to have to get rid of
them. You mean
them.
vote him out of power?
It's going to have to be voted out of power or brought down in some form or fashion. And the United States has done this before.
Let me get Mr. Operative back, because I thought Mr. Operative was having a few problems, because he's usually pretty talkative, but he stopped in mid-sentence. That's not like Mr. Operative. Mr. Operative, would you care to respond to Charles? I thought there was a problem. Louis.
Well, I think that the balance of power in the Middle East is more nuanced than good guys and bad guys. There's other actors, and the U.S. has vested interest in the region. So like we just saw, for example, the United States give security guarantees to Qatar ahead of giving security guarantees to Saudi Arabia, which actually signals that there's something going on in the balance of power and the relationship the United States has with powers in the Middle East. And let's remember, China is also getting into that region, supporting several governments. So it's more complicated. I think the Trump administration did well with its 20-point proposal, because it sets out that Israel will not take control of Gaza. It gives Hamas an exit ramp that we all know they're not going to take it, and if they take it, they're going to break the deal. But it also lays out a permission for the Netanyahu government to finish the job if and when Hamas violates the agreement, if they ever actually reach it. I think that Iran is a main issue when it comes to terrorism in the Middle East, but that extends worldwide. We also just saw a terror attack in the United Kingdom in Manchester, and we just also saw in Germany how Hamas-linked terrorists have been arrested ahead of a plane planned terrorist attack there, and there's probably sleeper cells all over the world, including the United States, that came through that open border. So I don't think that we should zero in on the Netanyahu issue and whether or not he's trying to stay in power because of the just judicial problems that he have within Israel, because of course the interests for the United States go way beyond Israel, go way beyond Benjamin Netanyahu, and it actually has to do with national security, world security, and the proliferation of terrorism and groups that are their mere existence has been defined by trying to eradicate the U.S. form of government, democracy, and Western values.
Your reply?
Well, I would say that the polling has suggested that Israel is losing support around the world, including in the United States, among young Republicans and among young Democrats.
And you don't think that's misinformation and propaganda?
No. I certainly see it in dealings that I have with young people all the time. And it's certainly, I mean, Netanyahu
But maybe somebody
himself,
could say that the mainstream media, who certainly has little or no sympathy to Israel, and the propagandists from Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, this is what they're putting out there, and it's working to the point where people are indoctrinated and don't realize what the truth is.
well, that could well be true. I mean, there is a lot of propaganda on the internet, that's for sure true. But Netanyahu himself says that they need to secure TikTok. They need to buy TikTok because they're worried about the young people going in a more Israel skeptical direction. We certainly have seen all these protests at college campuses, and we've seen all these protests in Israel of the Netanyahu government. And so I think we have a real problem here, in that we have a guy who's very enmeshed in our system. I mean, the president's son-in-law has known Netanyahu for 30 years or something like that.
Jared,
yeah. So I mean, Netanyahu used to sleep in Jared's bed when he would come to visit, Charles Kushner in the family home. So there's a closeness there. There's a fondness there. But unfortunately, he is facing corruption questions. He was paid lots of bribes. This isn't really in dispute.
But Trump faced corruption questions, and he was reelected.
But Trump went through the legal process and was vindicated by it.
Okay.
And so, we have a system of checks and balances. And, Donald Trump was, I think, wrongfully indicted in many of those cases. And he survived, and he went through the process. He gave the process some attention. He paid for his legal bills. Netanyahu has never really faced any real accountability. And when there's been efforts to make him accountable, he's just prolonged the war.
Mr. Operative, your thoughts now that you're back with us?
This issue is so complex, and part of the main central figure issue in this is not so much the political problems that Netanyahu has, is the war has taken so long. And the Palestinians are very good at this. Hamas is expert at negotiation and stringing things out because they don't have a population that is accountable to. They do what they want. And Iran uses them as a surrogate poker, hot poker, to poke anybody that they want with this. It's a very difficult dance out in the Middle East. People make accusations of, that Qatar gives them money. Someone has to be the host so that you have access to these people and you have the ability to collect against them. And the Qataris have taken enormous internal risk with this, but they have the ability to manage this because they're led by sage international interlocutors that understand how complicated their neighborhood is. The Israelis need to come up with a solution that moves this process faster. And the states that have declared a Palestinian state, if you were to line all them up, it's a shameful display of the weakness of the West, because when you list the countries that are clamoring for that, they're the ones that are clamoring for the sovereignty of their own nation, because they've lost control of a number of the cities because of uncontrolled immigration. This is a vexing issue, and the Palestinians pressed it hard. What Hamas did, they started this fight. It was disproportionately horrific. And the shock of that is now being eclipsed by other videos, because Hamas is good at stringing this stuff out. They won't give in, and they won't give up. They need to be destroyed in order to fix this. And we are in a very sticky mess. The United States is trying to walk on this razor blade and not get cut. It's going to be a very difficult road ahead.
Charles?
Yeah, I would just say that there's a long history here of the Netanyahu government going and killing people and trying to kill people, like they did in Qatar recently. I mean, you saw President Trump got Netanyahu to apologize to the Qataris, which is, he's not known for apologizing. But no, I mean, I think what we have here is we have a people in the form of the Palestinians who have been mistreated, and you're starting to see more and more radicalism.
So you don't think Israel needs a strong man?
No.
What do they need?
I think Israel, well, if you listen to Yossi Cohen, the former director of Mossad, he said the problem with Gaza was that they had outsourced all the intelligence gathering to the IDF. I think what they need is more intelligence, more capabilities from Mossad, from CIA and others, and that we should be much more treating this like an intelligence approach rather than a military one that is unfortunately way disproportionately killing women and children.
Louis?
No, I think actually, if anything, October 7th proved that Israel was prepared in their intelligence planning, but was not prepared in their military and operational strategy to react to something like this. If we think about the beeper operation from Mossad, like that was like a decade in the making. So intelligence was on their toes with this, but the IDF didn't have the operational plan set up to react to an attack like October 7th. And we also need to think about who's to benefit for everything that is happening, right? Who's to benefit for discrediting the only democracy in the Middle East? Who's to benefit for spreading propaganda or ramping up certain kinds of information in Western nations that cause division? And we know from 2016 election that countries like Russia, China, Iran, and pretty much enemies of democracy in the free world have weaponized information, and they don't necessarily need to have a specific goal. It's not that they're against conservatives or against Trump. They just need to sow division within democracies to have them be at a standstill. And we can see that constantly in the United States, how democracy is not allowed to operate because of all the division that has been sown. So I think that Israel has a government that has been legitimately elected. It's operating within a democratic system. It's facing an external and existential threat that it needs to eliminate. And again, I think the Trump administration gave a good example to the world. It's a 20-point plan to try and bring peace to Gaza. It appeases some of the main concerns that Western nations who have supported the creation of a Palestinian state have, which is that Israel will not end up controlling Gaza. But it also highlights the requirement for any sort of peace deal, which is Hamas needs to stop existing. We cannot make deals with terrorists that reward their horrific actions. That's just not how things work, and it's not how we're going to achieve peace.
Hold that point for us. We'll be back. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Sam Faddis, it's always a pleasure seeing you on our broadcast platform. Recently I sat down with the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, and I asked him what was the biggest threat to the United States counterterrorism domestic terrorism, and he immediately said the PRC, that China was our biggest threat. It sort of shocked me. You care to elaborate what insights he has? Because oftentimes you say the same on this platform, that they're a threat.
Well, I mean, if Cash and I are saying the same thing, and that shows that Cash is a very bright fellow. That's the first thing.
Yes.
Look, I mean, from a strategic standpoint, I think that's absolutely clear. And this is the one entity on the planet that is actually growing in strength and has the potential to challenge us strategically for dominance on the planet. So the terrifying aspect of it to me is that we have climbed in bed economically with the PRC, with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, to such an extent that we don't really want to change course and stop fueling this thing. I mean, we're the ones who are making them stronger and more lethal.
So talk to us with your expertise within the CIA. How do they carry out their activities right here on American soil?
Well, they have what they refer to as a whole of government approach. So every element of the Chinese presence on our soil feeds and is part of this effort to, in some way, to steal all of our secrets, to suborn our people, to infiltrate our institutions. So they're sort of everywhere. Any point of contact with the CCP, with the Chinese Communist Party, it's all part of the same beast. And we have allowed them to spread so widely that it's effectively impossible to control that or keep track of that.
So let me just continue with you, since you're just joining us in the latter stages of this conversation. What will it take to bring peace between Ukraine and Russia? Just recently, Russia fired another 590 drones with no end in sight. And what is Russia really telling us, and how much leverage does the United States and Europe have to stop it? And then what did we accomplish from that summit between Putin and our president in August?
Well, I think what we accomplished from the summit is we began a dialogue and began a process. As I've said to you before, that's really going to be a very long, very protracted, and very painful process. I mean, being involved in these negotiations like pounding nails into your forehead. This was never going to be something that was resolved overnight. What do we have to do? We have to get both parties to agree to concede things. Fundamentally, Zelensky's got to accept the fact that he's never getting back all of his territory, and Putin has got to accept the fact that he's never taking Kiev, and also made to feel so much pain that he can't continue the war. I continue to believe that a big piece of that is increasing the economic pain to Putin by cutting off his sales of oil, for instance, such that he can't even continue to fund the war.
When you speak of China, do you see them more as a military or an economic threat?
I think there's no way to separate those things. But look, this is not the big lie that we told the American people back when we climbed in bed with the Chinese was that by doing this, they were going to liberalize, democratize, and become more like us, and they would become our friends and all of that. As I've said to you before, I don't know whether anybody ever believed that, or if that was just a great Madison Avenue way to sell the whole proposition to the American people. But what we do know is that fundamentally, that's absolutely not true. I mean, they have not become our friends. They have got to. All we've done is make the dragon bigger and stronger and give it more capability.
Mr. Operative, do we have a coherent national strategy to counter, let's say, China's influence, or are we still playing catch up?
I don't think we have a national strategy and a position paper that I certainly have either seen or heard about to direct any intelligence activity against near peers, hostile terrorist groups. I think it's so loose that it's difficult to put your finger on what do we want to happen. I haven't seen a paper come out, even when I was still in the government, that came out that said the new administration lays out their policy plan on what they would like to see happen in the world. They just stopped when Clinton became the president, and they haven't picked up since. And we're basically a firehouse style of foreign policy. We wait, a fire starts, we get on the coolest, best fire truck ever manufactured, and we race out to the region to put a Band-Aid on some problem that we really don't understand. 22 to 24 years of failed combat in Afghanistan and Iraq should be something that is readily absorbed by the political leaders of the country. We have bled ourselves into bankruptcy and destroyed a generation of some of the best fighting forces ever assembled because we don't have a plan. We don't know what we want to do. President Trump is right when he said the war in Ukraine should have never happened. That's the truth. And you can't change the facts that if once a war begins, putting that fire out and coming to some conclusion that is workable between two warring parties is a Herculean lift. The best path you have is to prevent war, which is what the CIA's job was for decades, is to early warning and to prevent armed conflict. If you have to use the military, your intelligence machinery and your decision-making matrix has failed you. Because if you get to the point where your only option is to kill everybody that's on the other side, you've failed. And we're not putting out any fires before they flare up.
You know, Charles.
It's awful. It's immoral.
It is immoral. You know, Charles, I must admit that there is something about the fact that TikTok was saved by finding American partners. It doesn't say the American partners have any control, but I tell you what was really fascinating about closing that deal is that deal, I don't know if I've ever seen anything like this before, could not close until the President of the United States and the head leader in China got on the telephone. Should that bother us?
I mean, the old saw was that China would be more like us, but maybe we're becoming more like China. I mean, we have golden shares in companies now where the U.S. government has a controlling interest in some of these companies, like we see this with U.S. Steel. So yeah, it should bother us, but I think in some sense, it's a kind of inevitability. And we want to continue. I mean, the world's largest and second largest economies are always going to have a lot of interests in common, whether we want to admit that or not. And there is a billion billion Chinese running around. And I think what we really need to be focused on is the way in which they buy off organized crime here in the United States, the way in which they buy off our politicians, the way in which they compromise our tech stack, and the way in which they fund both sides of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And of course, all the troubles they're causing down in Venezuela. And we have leverage points. I mean, something like 80% of the oil that's in Venezuela, goes to China. And so we have ways in which we can kind of shape their economy. But I think it's going to be a long, kind of cold kind of war with them. And fortunately, I don't think it will turn very kinetic because of the one-child policy. Nobody wants to lose their kids there because it's the end of their line. And the Chinese don't really fight massive wars like the Russians do. But we have a lot of problems to come with the Chinese.
You know, he mentioned Venezuela, and they're putting federal troops on the border of Guyana. How much of a threat, and how concerned should our U.S. government be with that movement, Louis?
So the Venezuelan government, the regime of Nicolás Maduro, has threatened to invade Guyana on historical grounds. And of course, we also know that's because they found new oil deposits in that region. I don't think we should be concerned about an invasion happening anytime soon because there's no way that Venezuelan equipment can go through the dense forest that divides both nations. Who should be concerned is the regime of Nicolás Maduro that has a $50 million bounty on his head and about 11 warships off the coast of his of the country that he controls. And the U.S. has already shown that it's willing to use military power to strike vessels coming from Venezuela. And we know that there are reports of the Trump administration considering striking inside Venezuela to try and cripple all the cartels and these narco-terrorist organizations that have been labeled as foreign terrorist organizations by the U.S. government that are being operated by Nicolás Maduro.
I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Sam Faddis, what are other areas of security and concern around the globe that is often underreported that concerns you, that we should pay attention to?
Well, I mean, in some bizarre way, Afghanistan. I don't mean like it's bizarre that Afghanistan is of concern. I think it's bizarre to me that having spent 20 years there and poured all this money in, that we now want to pretend like nothing's happening there. I mean, and we periodically talk as if the Taliban that we fought against for 20 years is somehow now our ally and is going to help us and we can have reasonable conversations. I mean, Al-Qaeda is bigger and stronger in Afghanistan than it ever was before. Its senior Al-Qaeda personnel hold formal positions in the Afghan government. The training camps are rocking and rolling. There are arsenals there, and you know, there's this lash up with the Pakistani Taliban in a concerted effort which is making significant progress to overthrow the Pakistani government. Amongst other things, that means we got at least 200 nuclear weapons at play here. You know, I mean, potentially up for grabs. So that whole problem that we were seized with for a really long time has not gone away, isn't getting better, is metastasizing, if that's the right phrase to use, and we're kind of acting like, you know, we can just ignore it until it comes home to roost. I mean, until stuff starts blowing up here on our soil again, and then all of a sudden we will, you know, to follow up on my old friend's commentary, and then we will react and send the fire brigade to do something instead of moving now to prevent the disaster before it occurs.
Mr. Operative, areas of concern for you?
I have a very similar worldview to Sam. You might not be surprised to hear that, but these fires are starting to burn, and that's what the CIA's historic job was, is to anticipate and preempt and steer things away from full-on armed combat. Afghanistan is a terrorist state, and there's no one watching it. We really don't know how much was left behind by the U.S. military because we left in such a breathless manner. But they have money now. They have infrastructure. They have the internet, full broadband fiber optic internet. They have all kinds of assets now that they did not have in 2001. And they have oil. They have natural resources that they're exploiting and exporting, and a compliant population who's not going to resist. We just packed our marbles and left. And then when you look around the theater, they're next door to Iran, a major problem for us. We haven't had an embassy there since 1979. And I would venture to say we don't have very good intelligence picture of Afghanistan, Iran, Russia, China. The states that are arrayed against us have an advantage. We're out of position. There's disarray in the policy community and disarray in the intelligence apparatus. And you can't just ignore that because our opposition, our enemies are not ignoring it. There's open field running available, and they're running. And we're going to have to deal with it eventually. It's coming. And my fear is it's coming here. They're going to They know that we can be beaten now. They learned a lot from the 22 years of adventure with us. And if you stay out of the teeth of the military, which is not something that you can use here at home to defend the homeland, you can defend the homeland with the War Department outside of America. But when you have problems here and you have terrorist attacks here from all these undocumented people that aren't wearing uniforms, how do you deal with that? It's going to be a Herculean lift for us to deal with this. And the population is going to be in the middle of the battle space. But, you know, we've got all the big brains in D.C. They got this handled, no doubt.
So what concerns you, Charles?
Organized crime and, agent provocateurs in our society, people setting fires like in Los Angeles, people bringing drugs into the country, poisoning people with fentanyl, cults going into failure mode. And of course, I think a lot of these mass shooters are in fact people being made into being mass shooters. They're identified online and they're being radicalized by foreign actors. So those are the big things. But in general, I think most of the problems that we have are domestic. Most of these things are things that we've allowed over the years. And I think as time goes on, we're seeing more and more focus on that. And to Trump's credit, he did do the big beautiful bill, which has a lot of resources in there for Homeland Security. And I think that's going to be kind of critically important as years to come. I didn't vote for him, but I do support what he did there.
Louis?
I would add to what Charles said on organized crime. I think that the link that authoritarian regimes like Russia and China and Iran have made with these transnational criminal networks is of concern, and how they can activate those organized crime cells here in the United States to create chaos, sow division, and then launch their plans for world hegemony. And I know it sounds trite, but if you think of China and Taiwan, imagine a scenario where there's mass protests in major cities in the U.S., terrorist attacks from sleeper cells from the Middle East, and then China decides, and 2027 is around the corner, decides to launch its full invasion of Taiwan. There's going to be no political will in the United States to sustain any sort of defense of that island nation. And that would be just the first step in their plan to completely control the Pacific theater of war and leave the United States out of that area, and of course of all the critical trading routes and of course technologies that are required right now for the U.S. economy to function in any way. So I think the link in between authoritarian regimes like China, Russia, and Iran, foreign terrorist organizations, and transnational organized criminal networks here in Latin America and Central America should be of great concern to the American public, and understand those dynamics, how they can all work in tandem. Even though they all have different objectives and different goals, they have the common enemy of Western democracies and the rule of law.
With Americans' focus divided between the Middle East and Indo-Pacific, Sam, and domestic issues, are our enemies exploiting this chaos?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. In a word, yes, absolutely. I mean, look, we got a lot of enemies. We're always going to have a lot of enemies. We're going to have a lot of people that want to tear us down and take advantage of any opening you give them. So that's a given in the world, and we have to understand that. I mean, to pick up on a theme that several of the other folks have touched on, I mean, the way to manage all this is not to wait until such time as we have a crisis, and the answer is let's send in the United States Marines. That's not. I mean, that unfortunately will still occur, but the way to do this is to have a plan, to have forethought, to understand, so have the intelligence necessary to understand what the heck is really going on, and then move in a calculated way to protect our interests and safeguard the United States of America, to address these issues before they turn into something where we're now saying, let's send in the Marines or drop in the 82nd Airborne. We should not be dealing with it. And it is that absence of focus, strategic plan, and with, no surprise coming from me, an America First element, right? We went into Afghanistan because we got hit we were going to drive al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. We largely accomplished that in about 5 months. And then, for no discernible reason that I have ever understood, decided we'd spend the next 20 years transforming Afghanistan into Switzerland in Central Asia. How did that make any sense from a strategic standpoint? Made no sense in terms of the resources, the necessity. It was, a product of a whole variety of considerations, but not the product of somebody that sat down in a sober fashion and said, what's necessary to keep Americans safe?
Charles, I find it interesting that you admittedly did not vote for President Trump. Are you surprised at his leadership when it comes to foreign policy? Are you encouraged? How do you assess the president to date?
Well, on the homeland front, I think he's been largely correct. But on the international front, I think he's been more or less a failure, unfortunately. And I think we talked about this earlier about the Israel issue. I think he's widely seen as basically being controlled by the Israelis, unfortunately, by our allies. And I think he's also getting a lot older. And I don't think, J.D. Vance has what it takes to step into his shoes. So I think we have a real kind of topsy-turvy time coming ahead of us. I do credit, President Trump with focusing on the homeland first. I do credit him with being much more focused on counterterrorism stuff. But in general, I think he's been the president of basically the dominant political figure of the last 10 years. And I don't think we have a real vision yet of what the country looks like after him. And to me, that's kind of the most frightening thing about where we're entering. What does the country look like post-Trump? Or post-Netanyahu, or post-Putin, or post-Xi? I mean, these are big shoes to fill in these various countries, and they're all men in their 70s.
Sam, you have a minute to respond.
To all of that, yes. I don't think Trump has been a failure on the international stage. I do think we got a lot of challenges, and we have yet to. I mean, Gaza is one of them. It's a very interesting, innovative plan. If Hamas would buy into it, I'd feel a lot better, and I'm not putting any money on that proposition. I mean, I expected that Hamas is going to look for a way to douse this thing in gasoline and set it on fire. That's what I anticipate in Gaza.
Louis?
Well, I
20 seconds.
Really quickly, I think President Trump has shown some weakness when it comes to China, like campaign Trump and first 2 months Trump with the trade wars with China was very different from what we're seeing right now. He barely mentions China as a national security threat. I also do think that post midterms, we're going to see a very different Trump and foreign relations coming from the U.S. when he feels unleashed, and the fact that he knows he's not running for a re-election, or at least that we know of, and not having any elections coming around the corner. We might see foreign policy more aggressive coming from the White House.
Impressive in 20 seconds. And that's a wrap. Thank you all for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show.